The wind that morning carried the faint scent of dust and gun oil, a mix familiar to anyone who's ever spent time on a military base. The sun was barely above the horizon, light spilling across rows of armored vehicles and concrete barracks. Soldiers moved with routine precision, boots striking the ground in rhythm, laughter mixing with orders shouted across the yard. And there she was, standing at the edge of it all, her uniform neat but old, her backpack slung over one shoulder, and a small patch stitched onto her sleeve that would soon set off a storm she didn't see coming. The Ranger patch. It wasn't new. The threads had faded, edges slightly frayed, but to her it was more than just fabric. It was a story, a memory, a tribute to the men and women she had once called family. Yet as she stood in line for entry clearance, the young sergeant behind the checkpoint looked at her sleeve and frowned. He leaned forward, scanning her credentials again, his expression skeptical. To him, she looked too calm, too quiet, too ordinary to be what that patch claimed she was. His words came out sharp and cutting. "That's not a real Ranger patch." For a moment, she said nothing. Years of discipline had taught her silence could speak louder than anger, but inside her chest, the old wounds reopened. The kind of scars that don't bleed but still ache when pride meets disbelief. She had faced worse than insults. She had fought in deserts where the horizon burned red, in jungles where every sound meant danger, and in mountains where the air itself wanted to kill you. Yet somehow this moment, being doubted, dismissed, unseen, hurt more than any battlefield. She tried to explain softly that she had served once, that she had been part of something real, something earned. But the young sergeant only crossed his arms, his tone growing colder. Around them, a few others began to whisper, their glances shifting toward her patch like it was a badge she didn't deserve. A few chuckled under their breath. The kind of laughter that stings, that makes you feel small even when you've already proven everything you needed to. She turned away before her voice could break. What none of them knew, what the patch truly meant, was something that would change their perception forever. She had been part of a classified joint task force that operated in silence, often without record or recognition. Her missions had no press releases, no medals pinned in ceremonies, only folded flags and memories that kept her awake at night. She had watched brothers in arms fall in places even the maps didn't mark. She had worn that patch not for pride, but for those who couldn't anymore. Hours passed. She sat quietly near the motor pool, waiting for her clearance papers to be processed. The whispers still followed her, the disbelief thick in the air. Then just before noon, something unexpected happened. A convoy of blacked-out SUVs rolled through the base gates. Soldiers straightened immediately. Everyone knew that kind of arrival. Delta Force. The vehicles came to a stop near the command office. The doors opened and out stepped men whose presence alone carried authority. Their faces were shadowed by caps and sunglasses, their uniforms stripped of name tags, but the way they moved told everyone who they were. Silent, deliberate, and dangerous. The base commander walked out to greet them, confusion in his tone. But one of the Delta operators scanned the yard and then froze. His gaze locked onto her. For a few seconds, no one understood what was happening. Then he began walking toward her. Every step he took seemed to draw the air tighter, every soldier watching now in stunned silence. When he reached her, he didn't speak. He stood straight, removed his sunglasses, and raised his hand in a sharp, deliberate salute. The courtyard fell silent. Then another Delta operator followed. Then another. And within moments, the entire group stood in formation, facing her, saluting in perfect unison. The same young sergeant who had mocked her now looked on, his face pale, eyes wide with realization. He didn't understand, not fully, but he knew enough. The base commander stepped forward, confused but respectful, asking what was happening. The lead Delta operator finally spoke, his voice steady but carrying the weight of truth. He said that years ago she had been their commanding officer, the one who led a rescue operation deep behind enemy lines when every other team had turned back. That patch, the one they'd laughed at, wasn't just real. It was earned in blood. She had saved half their lives. The silence that followed was heavier than any explosion. The young soldiers who had doubted her stood frozen, shame written across their faces. Some tried to look away. Others lowered their heads. She didn't gloat, didn't speak a word of anger. Instead, she simply nodded, her eyes reflecting both pain and grace, the kind that comes only from someone who has seen too much to hate anyone anymore. The Delta team escorted her into the command building, not out of protocol but out of respect. Every soldier they passed stood at attention, and for the first time in years she felt seen again, not as a ghost of the past but as the living embodiment of everything the uniform stood for. Inside the office, she briefed them on classified operations, details she had been tracking quietly since retirement. She hadn't come to prove herself. She had come because duty doesn't end when the uniform does. When she finally left the base later that evening, the sun was setting behind the hangars. The air had changed. The same young sergeant was waiting near the gate, his expression humble, his voice quiet as he apologized. She smiled faintly, told him to take care of the new recruits, and walked away. There was no bitterness in her step, only peace. Because sometimes vindication isn't in being right. It's in being remembered for who you truly are. She paused for a moment near the exit, the last rays of sunlight catching the edge of her patch. It shimmered faintly and the threads worn, but the meaning eternal. Then she turned and disappeared into the fading light, her shadow stretching long across the ground like the echo of every soldier who ever walked before her. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of sacrifice, courage, or the quiet strength of those who serve, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who still believes in honor. Special request: tell us in the comments, what does true respect mean to you?